Hey, that was on too.
The thing about secrets is, they never stay buried. You can tend to them for a lifetime, water them with silence, and fence them in with isolation. But they possess a will of their own. They find a way to push through the soil when you're least prepared. And in the autumn of 1987, 23 years of careful protection unraveled in a matter of days. Everything I thought I understood about the creature living on our land, everything I thought I knew about my own life, turned out to be built on foundations I never knew existed. My name is Elias Thorne, and I was 49 years old when the truth finally caught up to us. I lived with my younger brother Samuel, who was 45, on a sprawling timber ranch in the northern reaches of the Oregon Cascades, up where the wilderness gets serious about swallowing you whole. Our property covered just over 600 acres of mixed terrain, rolling pastures for the few cattle we kept, dense stands of old-growth Douglas fir and western hemlock, and rocky outcroppings that gave way to a network of lava tubes and caves we'd been exploring since we were boys. The nearest town was Black Creek, population 600 on a good day, and it sat 15 miles down a winding gravel road that turned to a river of mud every time it rained, which was often. We'd inherited the place from our father in 1964, the year a sudden heart attack took him while he was mending a fence on the South Ridge. Dad had worked that land for 40 years, and his father before him. The Thorns had deep roots in that soil, deeper than most people knew. But the deepest secret wasn't in the soil at all. It was in the caves. That October morning started like any other. I was in the workshop trying to coax our ancient Ford tractor back to life, while Samuel rode the fence lines on his steady mare, a bay named Cricket, who knew the property better than either of us. The radio on my workbench was playing something by U2, a song about a place with no named streets, and I remember thinking how strange it was that music from the outside world could reach this far into our solitude, carrying whispers of a life that felt entirely fictional from where I stood. The tractor's engine had been sputtering for a week, and I was elbow-deep in grease when I heard Cricket's hooves on the gravel drive, moving faster than they should have been. Samuel never ran that horse unless something was wrong. Her spirit was willing, but her joints were getting old, and he babied her like she was made of fine china. I pulled my head out from under the hood just as Samuel swung down from the saddle, his face etched with an expression I hadn't seen in years. The last time he'd looked like that was in 1978, when a wildfire had crested the eastern ridge, and we'd spent 3 days fighting it back with nothing but shovels and adrenaline. "Elias, we've got company," he said, his voice low and tight. "People on the north boundary. Official looking. Trucks, equipment, the whole 9 yards. They're setting up some kind of base camp." My stomach dropped the way it always did when the outside world pressed too close. What kind of official? Couldn't get close enough for a good look, but the trucks had government plates, federal, not state. And Elias, one of them was carrying a rifle. Not for hunting. Military style. The north boundary. That put them maybe 2 miles from the main cave entrance, close enough to stumble across it if they were doing any kind of thorough survey, close enough to find him. "Did they see you?" "Don't think so. I stayed in the timber, watched from a distance. But if they start moving south..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what was at stake. "I'll go tonight," I said, already stripping off my greasy work gloves. "After dark. Warn him, see if he knows anything." Samuel nodded, his weathered face creased with a worry that had nothing to do with failing tractors or approaching storms. "I'll keep an eye on them tomorrow. But Elias, if this is what I think it is, if the government's finally found evidence of him..." "We can't think about that yet," I interrupted, though it was the only thing I could think about. "We just need information. Everything else comes after." That night, Lying awake in my narrow bed and waiting for the moon to set, my mind drifted back to the winter of 1964, when Samuel and I first discovered we weren't alone on this mountain. Our father had been dead for 3 weeks when the blizzard hit. It was one of those Cascade specials that rolls in from the Pacific, dumping snow by the foot and then switching to freezing rain just to seal the world in ice. We lost power on the first day, which was normal, and by the third day we were rationing firewood because neither of us had thought to stock the woodshed properly before the weather turned. Dad had always handled that, and we were still learning all the countless ways his absence would reshape our lives. I was 26 then, Samuel was 22, and we were trying to run a ranch we barely understood while grieving a man who had been more of a force of nature than a father. The storm felt like a test, a challenge from the mountain itself to see if we were worthy of the land we'd inherited. On the fourth morning, with the snow finally tapering off, but the cold settling in like it meant to stay forever, we bundled up and headed for the old mill shed to look for an extra kerosene heater. The shed sat a few hundred yards from the main house, a structure our grandfather had built in the 1920s. We didn't use it much anymore, mostly for storing old equipment we couldn't bear to part with. That's when we heard the sound. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't a trapped animal, though that was my first thought. It was something between a moan and a cry, a sound of pure, bottomless exhaustion and fear that seemed to come from inside the shed itself. "Probably a deer," Samuel said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Got trapped inside looking for shelter." We approached carefully, and that's when we saw the tracks in the fresh snow. Footprints clearly bipedal, easily twice the size of my own, and sunk deep enough to suggest something incredibly heavy. They came from the deep forest to the northwest and led directly to the shed door, which hung slightly ajar. "That's not a deer," I said, stating the obvious. Samuel, always the braver of us, stepped forward and pushed the door wider. The hinges screamed in protest. In the dim light filtering through the snow-caked windows, we saw him. He was crouched in the far corner, trying to make himself smaller in a space that couldn't possibly contain him. He was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, even hunched over, covered head to toe in thick, dark brown hair matted with ice. His shoulders were broader than any human's, his arms longer in proportion to his body, and his hands were the size of dinner plates. But what struck me most were his eyes. Dark brown, almost black, and filled with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. This wasn't an animal. This was a person, a being with thoughts and fears, who understood he was in terrible danger. He was shivering violently, his whole body shaking with a tremor that went beyond cold and into something more serious. I'd seen hypothermia before. This creature, whatever he was dying. Samuel breathed a curse, and the creature made a low warning sound, defensive but weak. He was too exhausted to fight. "Easy," I said, using the same calm tone I'd use with a frightened horse. "We're not going to hurt you." "Elias," Samuel said quietly, "he's freezing to death." I was looking. Despite his massive size and thick hair, the creature was in crisis. The storm had been too much for him. Our shed had saved his life, but barely. "We need to get him warm," I said. "I'll get the kerosene heater from the barn. You stay here, try to get a fire going in that old wood stove." I ran through the snow faster than I'd run in years, my lungs burning, my mind racing with implications I couldn't process. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the creature from the stories, from the blurry photographs. He was real, and he was dying in our shed. I grabbed the heater, an armful of old horse blankets, a thermos of hot coffee, and whatever food I could carry. When I got back, Samuel had managed to get the wood stove lit, and the creature was watching the flames with something that looked like hope. We worked in silence for hours, feeding the fire, bringing more blankets, offering water and food. He watched our every move, but he didn't try to flee or attack. He seemed to understand that we were helping. By late afternoon, his shivering had stopped. He was still weak, but he was no longer in immediate danger. "We should let him rest," I said to Samuel. As we moved toward the door, the creature made a sound that stopped us. It was clearly intentional, communication. We turned. He was sitting up more fully, looking at us with those intelligent eyes. He touched his chest with one massive hand and made a sound. It took me a moment to pass it. "Silas." Samuel and I looked at each other, shocked. "He's telling us his name," Samuel whispered. I touched my own chest. "Elias," I said, then pointed at my brother. "Samuel." The creature, Silas, looked at each of us. His face showed something that looked almost like relief, as if the burden of being unknown had been lifted. "We'll be back tomorrow," I said. "Rest." He made a sound of acknowledgement, and by the time we closed the shed door, he was curling up beneath the blankets. Walking back to the house, we didn't speak. There was too much to process. But I knew we'd made a choice. We'd chosen to help, to protect. That choice would define the next 23 years. Standing in the workshop in October 1987, that memory was as clear as yesterday. The years between had been filled with countless small moments of trust, of bringing food and supplies to his cave, of learning his ways and teaching him some of ours. He'd moved from the shed to the cave system within a week of his recovery, and we'd been visiting him regularly ever since. But now, with federal agents on our property, I wondered if everything we'd built was about to collapse. I waited until after midnight before making the trek to the caves. I carried a flashlight, a backpack with supplies, and our father's old rifle. Not for Silas, never for him, but for the cougars that roamed our territory. The path was one I could walk in my sleep. The cave entrance was hidden behind a rock fall covered in moss, invisible unless you knew where to look. I flashed my light 3 times, our signal, and waited. Soon, Silas emerged from the darkness. He'd aged, as we all had. More gray in his hair, and he moved with a little less fluidity. But he was still the most impressive physical presence I'd ever encountered. "Silas," I said quietly, "we have a problem." He tilted his head, a gesture of concern. Over 2 decades, we'd developed a system of communication. He understood a lot of English, and he taught us some of his own sounds and gestures. I pulled out a small notebook and sketched stick figures representing men and trucks. Silas watched, and his posture changed immediately. His shoulders tensed, but it wasn't fear I saw. It was something that looked like dread, like resignation. "Silas, do you know why they might be here?" I asked. He made a low, urgent sound and gestured for me to follow him deeper into the cave. This was unusual. The deeper caves were his private space. I followed him through a narrow passage into a larger chamber I'd never seen. My flashlight beam swept across the walls, and I stopped breathing. The walls were covered in markings, deliberate symbols and drawings. Some looked ancient. Others were newer, clearly made by Silas. The drawings showed figures. Some were his kind, large and hairy. Others were human. But what made my blood run cold were the third type of figures. They looked like his kind, but were different, more aggressive, carrying what looked like crude weapons. And in several drawings, these aggressive figures were shown hunting and attacking others like Silas. "What is this?" I managed to ask. Silas pointed at the aggressive figures, then made a series of harsh, guttural sounds I'd never heard. Then he pointed at himself and made the gesture for hiding. "You've been hiding from them," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "Not from humans, from others like you." Silas nodded emphatically. Then he did something that shook me to my core. He pointed at a new drawing he'd made, showing men with equipment and vehicles, and beside them he'd drawn the aggressive figures together. "Are you saying those federal agents are working with these others?" Another nod, more urgent this time. He moved to another section of the wall where he'd drawn a crude map of the region. Most areas were marked with X's. Only a few remained unmarked, and one of them was roughly where our ranch sat. "They're looking for you specifically," I said, the terrible understanding flooding through me. "They've been hunting you for a long time." Silas touched the wall gently, over an ancient carving of several figures grouped together. Then he made a sweeping gesture across his throat. Death, his family. These aggressive creatures had killed his family, and he'd been running ever since. We'd thought we were protecting him from curiosity seekers and trophy hunters. We'd had no idea he was a refugee, hiding from something far more dangerous. "How many of them are there?" I asked. "These aggressive ones?" Silas held up his hands multiple times. "A population, not just a few individuals. And they work with humans? Why?" He pointed to drawings that showed exchanges, the aggressive figures giving something to humans, receiving something in return. One drawing showed a captured creature like Silas being handed over to humans. "They're trading," I said, sickened. "They help humans find your kind, and in return they get..." "What? Territory? Protection?" Silas made a sound of affirmation, then he pointed back toward the cave entrance, toward the federal camp. They were close, and when they found this place, he didn't need to finish. He'd done this before, many times. "I need to go back," I said. "Talk to Samuel. We'll figure something out, Silas. We won't let them take you." But I wondered what two middle-aged ranchers could possibly do against a federal operation backed by monsters. When I reached the house, I found Samuel in the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee and an expression that told me he had news of his own. "Elias, we've got bigger problems," he said. "I picked up something on the shortwave." Military frequencies. I caught some fragments before they switched channels. "What did you hear?" He looked at me grimly. "Specimen, containment, and Elias, they said lethal force authorized." I sat down heavily. "It's worse than we thought, Samuel. A lot worse." I told him everything. The cave drawings, the aggressive creatures, the coordinated hunt. By the time I finished, Samuel looked as shaken as I felt. "We need help," I said. "Someone with authority, someone who might believe us." "Who?" Samuel asked. "The sheriff, the press, they'd turn it into a circus." Then a name surfaced, someone I hadn't thought about in years. "Do you remember Aris Thorne?" I asked. Samuel frowned. "Our cousin, the biologist, the one who did that wildlife study back in '79? She was with the Forest Service then," I said. "She spent 3 weeks on our property. I remember she found some unusual hair samples, big ones. She wanted to investigate further, but her supervisor shut her down. I'd always wondered if that supervisor knew something. Aris had been frustrated. She knew she'd found something significant." "She's with the regional office in Portland now," I said. "I've seen her name on some policy documents. You think she'd help?" "I think she never forgot those samples, and I think she's been waiting for a reason to investigate." I moved to the phone on the kitchen wall. "It's our only shot." The call took forever, but I finally reached a human voice that could transfer me to Dr. Thorne's office. Her secretary was skeptical, but agreed to pass along my message. "Tell her it's Elias Thorne, from the Cascade Ridge property. Tell her it's about the samples she found in '79. Tell her if she doesn't come soon, the species responsible might not exist much longer." There was a long pause. "Sir, Dr. Thorne is very busy. Tell her it's about the thing her boss told her to forget. Tell her I can prove it's real." Another pause. "I'll make sure she gets the message immediately." I hung up. Now we wait, but we couldn't wait passively. "I'm going back up there tomorrow," Samuel said, "to where I saw them camped. I need to get closer, see what they're really doing." "That's dangerous. I know these mountains better than they do. I can stay hidden." He grabbed a Polaroid camera. "If I can get photographs, anything that might help." He was right. Intelligence was crucial. He left at first light. I stayed at the house, monitoring the shortwave and watching the road. At 11 a.m., the shortwave crackled to life with Samuel's voice, low and tense. "Elias, you there? I'm here. What is it? You need to see this. I'm at the old fire tower site about 2 miles from their camp. Can you make it? Be there in an hour." I hiked as fast as my aging knees would allow. When I reached the old fire tower, I found Samuel crouched in the underbrush with a clear line of sight to a clearing below. What he showed me changed everything. It wasn't a survey camp. It was a military-style operation. I counted 5 large tents, multiple vehicles including what looked like armored personnel carriers, and at least a dozen men moving with military efficiency. But that wasn't the worst of it. At the edge of the clearing, secured in a reinforced holding pen, was a creature. It was similar to Silas, but where Silas's hair was dark brown and his demeanor gentle, this creature had black hair and radiated menace. Even from this distance, I could see the aggression in its posture. This was one of them, one of the aggressive ones from Silas's drawings. "They're using it as a tracker," I said, my voice hollow. "Look," Samuel said, handing me his binoculars. Through the magnification, I watched as a soldier approached the pen with a haunch of raw meat. He showed no fear. He pushed the meat through a slot, and the creature snatched it. Then the man spoke, and the creature responded with deliberate sounds. They were conversing. "That thing isn't a captive," I said. "It's a partner." I watched as another man brought fabric samples to the pen. The creature sniffed them, then made a series of gestures that the men seemed to understand. Silas's scent. They were going to use this creature to hunt him. Samuel had already taken several Polaroid photographs. "We need to get back," I said. "Warn Silas." We were halfway down the ridge when the helicopter appeared, its searchlight sweeping the forest. They were expanding their search. "Get down!" Samuel hissed. We pressed ourselves into the ground as it passed overhead. We made it back to the ranch to find something waiting for us that made my blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks in our driveway. On our front porch, stuck in the doorframe, was a business card. Major Grant, Department of Interior Special Operations. On the back was a simple message: "Cooperation is expected. Interference will be prosecuted." "They know," Samuel said. "They know we're here." And then, as if on cue, the sound of an engine came from the access road. A vehicle approaching. We moved into concealed positions, ready for the worst. But the vehicle that emerged was a Forest Service truck, and the woman who climbed out looked like she'd been driving all night. Aris Thorne had aged, but so had we all. She was in her mid-40s now, her eyes sharp and alert, despite her exhaustion. "Cousin Elias," she said, walking toward us, "your message was compelling." "Aris, thank you for coming. Those samples from '79 have haunted me for 8 years, she said. "My supervisor told me to drop it, and I've always wondered why. Your message suggested you have answers." "I have more than answers," I said. "I have proof. But Aris, before I show you anything, I need to know, what are you willing to risk?" She didn't hesitate. "If you can show me what I think you're going to show me, I'm willing to risk everything." I believed her. "Then come inside." Over the next 2 hours, we showed Aris everything. The Polaroids, my sketches of the cave drawings, the entire story going back to 1964. Her scientific training warred with her visible excitement. "You've had contact with one for 23 years, she said finally, her voice a whisper. "A living, sentient being, and you've been protecting it." "Protecting him," I corrected. "His name is Silas." Aris studied the sketches. "And these others, the aggressive ones. You're saying they're the same species but behaviorally distinct, and they've formed an alliance with elements of the US government?" "That's what it looks like," Samuel said. She stood abruptly, pacing. "If this is true, it's the biggest cover-up in modern history. An unknown hominid species, and the government is participating in..." "What?" Genocide? We don't know, I said, but they're hunting. Aris stopped pacing. I need to see him. Silas, I need to document this properly. If I can file a formal report, claim discovery of an unclassified species, they'll bury it, I said, like they buried your evidence in '79. Maybe, but it creates a paper trail, official documentation. If something happens to Silas after that, it becomes a legal issue. She was right. Secrecy had kept Silas safe, but it wasn't going to work anymore. We'll take you to him tonight, I said. That evening, as we waited for darkness, the shortwave came to life with encrypted traffic. We caught enough fragments to understand the hunt was accelerating, grid search expanding south. Tracking team reporting strong signal. Expect contact within 48 hours. 48 hours. That's all we had. We left for the caves at midnight. I gave the signal at the entrance. Silas, it's Elias. I have someone with me, a friend who wants to help. Please trust me. The silence stretched. Then Silas emerged slowly into our flashlight beams. Aris made a small sound, half gasp and half prayer. It's real, she breathed. Silas studied this new human with wariness. Silas, I said, this is Dr. Thorne. She's a scientist who wants to protect you. For a long moment, Silas didn't move. Then slowly, he stepped aside, inviting us into the outer chamber. Inside, Aris worked quickly, professionally. She photographed Silas, collected hair samples he offered, and documented the cave drawings. When she was done, she turned to face him. I understand you've been hunted, she said. I'm going to do everything in my power to protect you. Silas looked at her, then made a soft sound that sounded like gratitude. We were packing up when we heard the helicopters. 2 of them this time, their searchlights sweeping the forest closer than ever. We moved as quickly as stealth allowed, the helicopters passing overhead twice. By the time we reached the house, Aris's face was set with determination. I need to get this report filed immediately, she said. She spent the next hour on the phone. When she finally hung up, her expression was grim. I've filed formal notification of species discovery with 3 different agencies. It's in the system. They can't pretend it doesn't exist. Will it stop them? Samuel asked. Probably not, but it creates complications. The phone rang. I answered it cautiously. Mr. Thorne. The voice was clipped, professional. This is Major Grant. I believe you've been interfering with a matter of national security. I put the phone on speaker. Major, I recognize your name. Then you know this is serious. I've been informed that a Forest Service researcher has filed discovery claims based on evidence from your property. This is a federal matter that supersedes normal wildlife regulations. Aris leaned toward the phone. Major, this is Dr. Aris Thorne. I filed those claims based on legitimate scientific evidence. Dr. Thorne, Grant's voice cooled. I'm aware. I'm also aware you've had questions since 1979, questions your supervisors wisely told you to drop. Let me explain something. The creature you're protecting is not what you think it is. My grip tightened on the phone. What does that mean? I mean, your friend Silas isn't an innocent victim. It's a predator, a killer, and you've been sheltering it for over 2 decades. The words hit like a physical blow. That's not possible, I said. No? Then explain the bodies we found in those caves. Human remains from at least 5 individuals, some decades old, hikers, campers, who wandered too far and never came back. All with injuries consistent with an attack by something large and powerful. The creature you're protecting isn't a victim, Grant continued. It's a serial killer. The aggressive population you think is hunting it. They're actually trying to police their own kind, helping us track down predators like Silas before they harm more humans. He mentioned a group of college students who disappeared in November 1964, right when we'd found Silas. The creature needed somewhere to hide, Grant said, and you gave it sanctuary. You've been accessories to murder for 2 decades, gentlemen. Aris stepped forward. Major, if you have evidence of this, we need to see it. I'd be happy to share it, but first, you need to stand down, stop interfering, or you'll be charged as accessories after the fact to multiple homicides. The line went dead. We stood in silence, the weight of Grant's accusations pressing down on us. It's not true, I said finally. It can't be. Elias, Samuel's voice was careful, we need to consider... No, I cut him off. 23 years, Samuel. If Silas was a killer, we would have known. Aris was looking at the Polaroids. He's right about one thing, she said slowly. The timing of Silas's arrival does match several disappearances, but we need to verify. We need to go back to that cave, the one with the drawings. Look more carefully. I didn't want to, but she was right. We couldn't defend Silas if we didn't know the truth. Tonight, I said. We go back tonight, and whatever we find, we deal with it. The hike to the caves felt different, threatening. Silas wasn't at the entrance when we arrived. We called out, but there was no response. We entered without him, moving deeper into the cave system than we'd gone before, into passages I'd never explored. And then we found it. Not bodies, something else entirely. The chamber was arranged like a shrine. Personal items were laid out in groups, backpacks, clothing, small objects, each collection separated from the others, with carved wooden figures placed beside them. This isn't a trophy room, Aris said, her voice hushed. This is a memorial. I could see it now. The items were preserved, protected, and beside each collection, scratched into the cave wall, were names, phonetic approximations. Jenny, Michael, Rebecca. He didn't kill them, I said, understanding flooding through me. He found them. People who died in the wilderness, exposure, accidents. He found their bodies and brought their belongings here. He was trying to honor them. This is mourning behavior, Aris said, photographing everything. Grief expressed through preservation. These are not the actions of a predator. A sound from behind us made us spin around. Silas stood in the entrance, his massive form backlit. He looked at us, at the memorials, and made a mournful, grieving sound, as if we'd intruded on something private. Silas, I said gently, these people, you found them after they died. He nodded slowly, then moved to one of the older displays. He touched the items, then made gestures I could interpret. Cold, storm, found too late, couldn't save. He'd been trying to help them, and the memorial was evidence of his failures, his grief over those he couldn't rescue. Grant lied, Samuel said, or he interpreted the evidence to fit his narrative. As we prepared to leave, the sound of helicopters filled the air, closer than ever. They've found the cave system, I said. We're out of time. We scrambled through the passages, Silas leading us through routes I'd never known. We emerged into the forest 1/2 mile from the main entrance, just as searchlights began sweeping the mountainside. Through the trees, I could see figures moving toward the caves, armed soldiers, and among them, a shape that was not human. They'd brought their tracker. We ran. Silas led us through impossible terrain. Behind us, I could hear the pursuit, voices calling coordinates, and beneath it all, the hunting call of the aggressive creature, a howl that chilled my blood. Aris stumbled, and I caught her. "How long can we keep this up?" she gasped. Silas made a decision. He stopped at the edge of a ravine, looked at us, and gestured urgently. "Go! Hide!" He would draw them away. "No," I said. "We're not leaving you." He made the mournful sound again, then touched my shoulder. That gesture we'd shared for 23 years, and turned away, crashing through the underbrush with deliberate noise. "He's giving us a chance," Aris said quietly, "to get the evidence out, to tell the truth." She held up her camera. "Let's go," I said. "Let's make his sacrifice count." We made it back to the ranch by dawn, exhausted but alive. Aris immediately went to work, preparing her documentation. I'm sending copies to every news outlet I can think of, she said, and a formal complaint against the Department of Interior. The phone rang. It was Grant. Mr. Thorne, your friend led us on quite a chase, very impressive. Where is he? I demanded. He's contained, for now. But here's the thing. When we cornered him, he didn't fight. Our tracking specialist was ready for a battle, but your Silas just stopped, surrendered. Because he's not a killer, I said. Because you were wrong. There was a pause. We examined that memorial chamber. I'll admit it raises questions. Then let him go. It's not that simple. But I'm going to do something that could end my career. I'm delaying the termination order for 48 hours. That's how long you have. And I want to meet with your scientist, review her findings directly. She comes alone. Aris was already gathering her materials. It's a risk, I said. Could be a trap. I have to take it, she said. She left an hour later. The meeting lasted 6 hours. When she finally returned, her face showed the exhaustion of someone who'd been arguing for their life. Well, Samuel asked. Grant reviewed everything, she said. He also showed me their evidence. There are human remains, but they're old, and there's no definitive sign of violence. It's ambiguous. So what happens now? Grant signed a stay of execution, extended to 30 days while they conduct proper analysis. He's also agreed to investigate their partnership with the aggressive population to see if they've been manipulated. It was more than I'd expected. He's not a monster, Aris said. He's a soldier who's been given bad intelligence. Now he's questioning it. What about Silas? Still contained, but in protective custody. We can see him tomorrow. Grant wants to observe his behavior. The next morning, we drove to the military base. Grant met us at the perimeter. He was shorter than I'd expected, with eyes that had seen too much. What makes you so certain about this creature? He asked me. He saved my life once, I said. Winter of '71. I fell through ice on the North Creek. He pulled me out, carried me back to the house, and started a fire. He could have let me die. No one would have known. Grant was silent for a moment. Come on, he said. They'd set up a containment area in a large tent. It wasn't a prison. Silas was sitting in the center, watching the entrance. When he saw me, he made a sound of relief and greeting. I'm here, Silas, I said, approaching slowly. He stood and came to the barrier, his hand coming up to touch my shoulder through the mesh. That gesture, Grant said quietly. What does it mean? Trust, I said. Gratitude. Something like love. Over the next 2 weeks, I spent hours each day with Grant and his team, recounting every interaction I'd had with Silas. Aris analyzed everything, and the contrast between Silas and the aggressive population was stark. The evidence is overwhelming, she told Grant. Your partners have been lying to you. Grant was building his case, but the aggressive population knew something was wrong. They're demanding access to Silas, Grant told us one evening. They want to make sure we're still planning to eliminate him. The confrontation came 3 days later, an alarm from the containment area. They've broken the perimeter, Grant's voice crackled over the radio. 3 of them. They're heading for Silas's tent. We raced to the base camp, arriving to find chaos. I ran toward the containment tent without thinking. It was torn open. Inside, Silas was backed against the far wall, 3 massive figures closing in. The tracker I'd seen was leading the assault. It made a harsh sound as I entered, a challenge. Then it lunged. Silas moved with impossible speed, sidestepping the attack and grabbing the tracker's arm. But he didn't fight back with violence. Instead, he touched the tracker's face with his free hand and made a sound that was unmistakably compassionate, a gesture of connection, of forgiveness. The tracker stared at him, confusion replacing aggression. Then Grant's soldiers burst in and the spell was broken. The tracker pulled away, and the 3 of them disappeared into the night. I found myself on my knees beside Silas, who had slumped against the tent wall. "You didn't fight him," I said. "You tried to reach him." Grant appeared beside us. "That was the damnedest thing I've ever seen," he said quietly. "I've never seen one of them show mercy, and I've never seen one of the aggressive ones hesitate like that." The aftermath of that night changed everything. Grant's report, accompanied by Aris's analysis and my testimony, went to the highest levels. The partnership program with the aggressive population was suspended. It wasn't a complete victory, but Silas was free. Grant arranged for his release on our property with official protection status. On the day he returned to his caves, I walked with him through the forest one last time. 23 years, I said, and I never really understood. He made a gentle sound of acceptance. "What will you do if they come back?" I asked. He stopped, turned, and touched my shoulder. Then he made a series of sounds I didn't fully understand, but I caught the essence. He would keep trying, keep reaching out, keep believing that connection was possible. He left me at the edge of the cave system, disappearing into the darkness that was no longer a hiding place, but a home. I walked back to the ranch as the sun rose, thinking about everything that had happened. Monsters are real, I thought, but they're not always what we expect. Sometimes they wear uniforms and follow orders, and sometimes the creature in the shadows is the most human thing in the forest. The story didn't end there. Stories never do. Aris continued her research, revolutionizing the field. Grant retired, unable to reconcile his past actions with what he'd learned. Samuel and I kept running the ranch, visiting Silas, our friendship deepening. He was there when Samuel's heart gave out in the winter of 1992, offering a silent presence that was more comfort than any words. He was there when I faced cancer in 1998, somehow making his way to a hospital where Aris had arranged for me to have a private room with a window facing the mountains. And he was there on my 80th birthday, sitting with me on the porch as the sun set behind the peaks we both called home. "I don't know how much longer I've got," I told him. He made a sound of grief, the one from his memorial chamber. "It's okay," I said. "I've had a good life, a strange one, but good. A lot of that is because of you." He touched my shoulder, and I felt the weight of everything we'd shared settle between us. Then he did something he'd never done before. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to mine. In that moment, I understood. Love isn't about similarity. It's about recognition, seeing the essential nature of another being and choosing to honor it. We had recognized something in each other that first winter morning, something that had grown into the most important relationship of my life. That was worth everything. All the secrets, all the danger, it was worth every moment. I died 3 months later on a cold February night. Aris was there holding my hand, and somewhere outside, standing in the falling snow, Silas waited. I knew he was there. "Thank you," I managed with my final breath. I'd like to think he heard me. I'd like to think that somewhere in that brilliant, strange mind, he carries a memory of Elias Thorne, the rancher who chose to help instead of harm. And I'd like to think that when he adds my name to his memorial chamber, scratching it into the stone, he knows that I'm grateful. Grateful for the trust, grateful for the connection, grateful for the chance to know that monsters aren't always what they seem. Sometimes, if you're very lucky, they become the best friends you'll ever have. The snow kept falling, blanketing the mountains in white silence. In the caves above the ranch, Silas sat in his memorial chamber and made a sound that echoed off the ancient walls. It was grief and love and farewell, all wrapped in a single note. And somewhere, beyond the boundaries of the world I'd known, I heard it, and I answered.